The summer heat of Savannah, Georgia clung to my skin like a damp cloth as I stepped off the train in July of 1938. My name is Thomas Everett, and after finishing my psychology degree at Emory University, I had accepted a position with the Georgia State Psychiatric Board. My first assignment was to evaluate the mental condition of Eleanor Miller, a 43-year-old widow who had barricaded herself inside her Victorian home on East Jones Street for nearly 3 weeks, refusing all contact with the outside world. Dr. Everett, I presume. A tall man in a tan suit approached, extending his hand. Chief Inspector Howard Davis, thank you for coming on such short notice. We walked to his automobile, a black Ford that had seen better days. As we drove through Savannah's historic district, the Spanish moss hanging from the oak trees seemed to drape the city in a funeral shroud, despite the bright summer sun. The situation is unusual, Davis explained, lighting a cigarette. Mrs. Miller was a respected member of the community. Her husband, Jonathan Miller, was a successful banker who died unexpectedly of heart failure 3 years ago. They had no children. Mrs. Miller has lived alone since then, keeping mostly to herself but maintaining her standing in the community. Then 3 weeks ago, her housekeeper arrived to find the doors locked, windows shuttered. Mrs. Miller shouted through the door that she wasn't to be disturbed. "And why call me instead of simply forcing entry?" I asked. Davis exhaled a plume of smoke. "Neighbors have reported disturbances, Mrs. Miller shouting at someone, furniture being moved at odd hours, and—" he hesitated. "Children's voices, calling for their mother." "But you said they had no children," I noted. "Exactly." Davis flicked his cigarette out the window. "The neighbors are concerned. This isn't just a case of grief or eccentricity. Something's wrong in that house." We pulled up to a handsome 3-story Victorian home with a wraparound porch. Despite the summer heat, all the windows were tightly shuttered. The garden, once meticulously maintained according to Davis, had grown wild and unkempt. "We've tried reasoning with her," Davis said as we approached the front door. "Her sister came from Charleston, but Mrs. Miller wouldn't even speak to her." I straightened my tie and knocked firmly on the heavy oak door. No response. I knocked again, louder. "Mrs. Miller, I'm Dr. Thomas Everett from the State Psychiatric Board. I'd like to speak with you." Silence stretched for nearly a minute. Then, so faint I almost missed it, came a child's voice from inside. "Mother, someone's at the door." Davis and I exchanged glances. The voice was unmistakably that of a young boy, perhaps 8 or 9 years old. Then came Mrs. Miller's voice, hushed but audible. "Quiet now, they'll hear you." I leaned closer to the door. "Mrs. Miller, I'm here to help. Would you please open the door so we can talk?" More silence, then the sound of multiple locks being turned. The door opened just a crack, revealing a sliver of Eleanor Miller's face. Her once attractive features were haggard, her eyes bloodshot and surrounded by dark circles. "There are no children here," she said, her voice hoarse. "You're wasting your time." "Mrs. Miller," I said gently, "I'd just like to talk with you. May I come in?" Her eyes darted past me to Davis, then back to me. "Just you, not him. He doesn't believe me." Davis nodded, and I followed Mrs. Miller into the dimly lit house. The air inside was stale and uncomfortably warm. As she closed the door behind me, I heard it again, the faint sound of a child's laughter from somewhere upstairs. Mrs. Miller froze, her eyes wide with fear. "You need to leave," she whispered urgently. "They don't like strangers." "Who doesn't like strangers, Mrs. Miller?" I asked, my clinical instincts taking over despite the chill that ran down my spine. "My children," she replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "They've come back to me, but they're not the same anymore." The interior of the Miller home was impeccably clean, but eerily still. Heavy velvet curtains blocked most of the summer light, leaving the rooms in perpetual twilight. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece, but as I glanced at them, I noticed something strange. In every picture, Eleanor and Jonathan Miller stood alone or with other adults. There were no children. Mrs. Miller led me to a sitting room where a tea service had been laid out for three. Not two, three. A child-sized chair had been pulled up to the table, and a small teacup with milk sat untouched. "Please sit down," Mrs. Miller said, smoothing her wrinkled dress. Once elegant, she now had the disheveled appearance of someone who had stopped caring about her appearance. Her greying hair was loosely pinned up, and her hands trembled slightly as she poured tea into the remaining cups. "Mrs. Miller," I began carefully, "Chief Inspector Davis mentioned that you and your husband didn't have children." Her hand froze mid-pour, tea spilling onto the tablecloth. "That's what everyone thinks," she said quietly. "That's what Jonathan wanted everyone to think." I took out my notebook, keeping my voice professional and calm. "Could you tell me about your children?" "They came to me 3 weeks ago," she said, dabbing at the spilled tea with a napkin. "First William, then little Sarah. They called to me from upstairs, crying, 'Mother, Mother, we've come home.'" "And before 3 weeks ago?" I asked. Mrs. Miller's eyes darted to the doorway, then back to me. "They were taken from me. 20 years ago. William was 7, Sarah was only 4. A soft thump sounded from upstairs, followed by what sounded like footsteps. Light, quick, like a child running across the floor. "They're listening," Mrs. Miller whispered, her eyes wide. "They always listen. They're not supposed to show themselves to strangers, but they're curious about you. Mrs. Miller, records show that you and your husband moved to Savannah 15 years ago from Boston," I said gently. "If your children were taken 20 years ago..." "We left Boston to escape the memories," she interrupted. "Jonathan couldn't bear the reminders. It was his fault, you see. He sent them away, and they never came back. Not until now." Another noise from upstairs, a child's giggle followed by a hushing sound. "May I see them?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Miller's expression hardened. "They're shy. They only come to me. No one else believes they're here." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The neighbors hear them sometimes. I know they do. They think I'm crazy, that I'm imagining things." "I don't think you're crazy," I said truthfully. "Whatever was happening in this house..." Mrs. Miller genuinely believed her children had returned. "But I'd like to understand better. Could we go upstairs?" Mrs. Miller hesitated, then nodded. "They might hide. They're good at hiding." She led me up the grand staircase to the second floor. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as we ascended, despite the July heat outside. The upper hallway was lined with closed doors. "This is William's room," Mrs. Miller said, stopping at the first door. "He always loved boats. Jonathan would take him sailing on the weekends." She opened the door to reveal a boy's bedroom, meticulously arranged with model ships on the shelves, a small desk with drawing paper and colored pencils, and a neatly made bed with a blue quilted coverlet. The room looked as though it had been prepared for a child expected to arrive at any moment, but something was off. The style of the model ships, the clothing hanging in the open wardrobe, they belonged to an earlier era. The late 1910s, not the present day. "And this is Sarah's room," Mrs. Miller continued, moving to the next door. The girl's room was similarly prepared, with dolls arranged on shelves and a small tea set on a table by the window. A child's dress lay on the bed, yellowed with age. "These rooms," I said carefully, "they've been like this since you moved in?" Mrs. Miller shook her head. "Jonathan forbade it, but after he died, I knew they'd come back someday. I had to be ready." She gazed around the room with a sad smile, and I was right. They came back to me. As we stood there, the temperature dropped further. I could see my breath misting in the air. From somewhere nearby came the distinct sound of a child's voice, so close it could have been right behind me. "Mother, who is this man? Is he going to take us away again?" I spent that first afternoon talking with Mrs. Miller, carefully building rapport while observing the strange phenomena that seemed to permeate the house. The children remained unseen, but their presence was undeniable. Doors would creak open, toys would move, and once, dramatically, a ball rolled across the upstairs hallway with no visible hand to guide it. By evening, I had convinced Mrs. Miller to allow me to return the next day. Before leaving, I spoke briefly with Chief Inspector Davis, who had been waiting outside. "There's something deeply wrong in that house," I told him, "but forcing her to leave could be traumatic. I need time to investigate further." Davis nodded grimly. "I'll arrange for you to speak with Dr. Harrison. He was the Millers' physician before he retired last year. If anyone knows their history, it's him." The following morning, I met Dr. Harrison at a small cafe near Forsyth Park. He was in his 70s, with a shock of white hair and alert blue eyes that evaluated me carefully. "The Millers were private people," he said after I explained the situation, "especially about their past. But as their doctor, I was privy to certain information." He stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "Did Eleanor tell you about the children?" "Yes," I replied. "William and Sarah. She said they were taken from her 20 years ago." Dr. Harrison sighed heavily. "I was afraid of this. When they first came to Savannah, Jonathan confided in me. They had indeed lost 2 children in Boston, diphtheria epidemic of 1918. William was 7, Sarah just 4. Eleanor suffered a complete nervous collapse afterward. She was institutionalized for nearly a year." The timeline matched Mrs. Miller's story, but with one crucial difference. "She believes they were taken, not that they died," I said. "A defensive mechanism," Dr. Harrison explained. "She couldn't accept their deaths. Jonathan said she would insist the children had been taken to a hospital and would soon return. After her release from the asylum, she seemed to accept reality, but Jonathan always feared she might relapse. That's why they moved to Savannah. A fresh start, away from the memories." "And they never had other children?" A shadow passed over the doctor's face. "Eleanor had complications during Sarah's birth. She couldn't have more children, which only compounded the tragedy." I took notes as Dr. Harrison continued. "Jonathan built a new life for them here. He never spoke of the children and forbade Eleanor from dwelling in the past. From all appearances, she had recovered. She was active in social circles, volunteered at the library, but after Jonathan died, she was alone with her grief," I finished. "Precisely. Grief can resurface in strange ways, especially when it's been suppressed for so long." Dr. Harrison leaned forward. "But tell me, Dr. Everett, you mentioned phenomena in the house. What exactly have you experienced?" I described the voices, the moving objects, the cold spots, all consistent with the children's presence as described by Mrs. Miller. Dr. Harrison's expression grew troubled. "I'm a man of science, Dr. Everett, but Savannah is an old city with many stories. Not all of them can be explained by rational means." "Are you suggesting something supernatural?" I asked, surprised that a medical man would entertain such notions. "I'm suggesting that grief and loneliness can create powerful psychological manifestations," he replied carefully. "But I'm also old enough to know that not everything in this world can be explained by our current understanding of science." After leaving Dr. Harrison, I visited the Savannah Historical Society to research the Miller home. What I discovered was disturbing. Before the Millers purchased it 15 years ago, the house had stood empty for nearly a decade following a tragedy. A mother and her 2 children had died there during a house fire. The children's bodies were found in the very rooms that Mrs. Miller had designated as William and Sarah's. By the time I returned to the Miller home that afternoon, my mind was racing with possibilities, none of them comforting. Mrs. Miller greeted me at the door, looking more composed than the day before. "They're excited to meet you properly today," she said with an unsettling smile. "They've decided they can trust you." "I'm honored," I replied, following her inside. The house felt different somehow, more alive, as though it were breathing around us. "William," Mrs. Miller called softly as we entered the sitting room. "Sarah, Dr. Everett has come back to visit." The room temperature plummeted. On the sofa across from us, the cushion depressed as though someone small had just sat down. Then another beside it. "They're here," Mrs. Miller whispered, her face radiant with a mother's love. "My children have come home." That second day in the Miller house tested the boundaries of my scientific understanding. I had come as a rational man, a psychologist trained to unravel the complexities of the human mind. I left questioning everything I thought I knew. After the cushions depressed on the sofa, a child's voice, clear as day, spoke from the empty space. "Hello, Doctor." "Mother says you're here to help." I struggled to maintain my composure. "Yes, William, I am." Mrs. Miller beamed at me. "You can hear him. I knew you would understand." Before I could respond, a small music box on the mantelpiece began to play by itself, a tinkling melody that filled the room. "That's Sarah," Mrs. Miller explained. "She loves music." For the next hour, I documented a series of inexplicable events. A pencil rose from the desk and drew a crude boat on a sheet of paper. Small footprints appeared in the dust on the hardwood floor. The temperature fluctuated wildly, freezing cold one moment, returning to normal the next. Throughout it all, the children's voices continued, sometimes whispering to each other, sometimes addressing their mother, occasionally speaking to me. They never materialized visibly, but their presence was undeniable. "How did you come back to your mother?" I asked, directing my question to the empty air where the voices seemed to originate. "We were always trying to come home," came the boy's voice, "but Father wouldn't let us in. He couldn't see us. Mother can see us now. After Father went away," the girl's voice added, "we could finally come inside." I glanced at Mrs. Miller, who nodded sadly. Jonathan never believed they could return. He forbade me from even speaking of them. "Where were you before you came back?" I asked the voices. A long silence followed. When William finally spoke again, his voice had changed, becoming deeper, more resonant than a child should be. "In the dark, waiting. Others are there too, but we found Mother." An icy chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Something was deeply wrong here, beyond grief, beyond delusion. I excused myself to use the bathroom, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. In the upstairs hallway, I paused outside the children's rooms. The door to Sarah's room stood ajar, though I was certain it had been closed earlier. Inside, I could see one of the dolls seated at the small tea table. As I watched, the doll's head turned slowly to face me, though no hand touched it. "They're not her children," a woman's voice whispered behind me. I spun around to find myself face to face with a young maid, her dark eyes wide with fear. "Bessie, the housekeeper," she introduced herself quickly. "I've been coming in the back way to leave food. She doesn't know I'm here." "What do you mean they're not her children?" I asked. Bessie glanced nervously down the hallway. "Mrs. Miller's children died long ago. These things, they came with the house. They were here when the Millers moved in. Mr. Miller could feel them, but he wouldn't speak of it. He had the pastor bless the house, had every room cleansed with sage and salt. It kept them quiet, but they never left." "Then whose voices am I hearing?" I demanded. "The Hamilton children," she whispered. "They died in the fire of 1908. Been haunting this house ever since. But they ain't children no more, mister, no matter what they sound like." Before I could question her further, a doll came flying out of Sarah's room, smashing against the wall beside us. Bessie crossed herself and fled down the back stairs without another word. When I returned to Mrs. Miller, she seemed oblivious to what had transpired. "The children like you," she said happily. "They say you have kind eyes." I forced a smile. "Mrs. Miller, did anything unusual happen when you first moved into this house? Anything that might have suggested it was occupied?" Her smile faltered. "Jonathan felt it first. Cold spots, missing items. He said it was an old house settling." She lowered her voice. "But sometimes at night I'd hear them crying. Jonathan said it was just the wind, but a mother knows her children's cries." "And you believe these are your children, William and Sarah from Boston?" "Of course they are," she replied, suddenly defensive. "Who else would call me mother?" As if in response, the children's voices began again, this time from upstairs, a sing-song chant that made my blood run cold. "Mother, mother, we're upstairs. Mother, mother, say your prayers. Mother, mother, don't you see? We're not who we seem to be." Mrs. Miller's face drained of color. They don't usually." "Mrs. Miller," I said urgently, "I don't believe these are your children. I think something else has taken advantage of your grief." She stood abruptly, her expression hardening. "You're just like Jonathan. You want to take them from me again." "I want to protect you," I insisted. "Whatever is in this house—" "Get out," she hissed. "Get out now." Behind her, the children's laughter grew louder, more distorted, less childlike with each passing second. As I backed toward the door, I saw a shadow on the wall, too tall, too twisted to belong to any child. "Mrs. Miller, please, leave!" she screamed, and as if responding to her rage, every door in the house slammed shut simultaneously. I had no choice but to depart, but I knew I couldn't abandon her to whatever had infested that house. Outside, I found Chief Inspector Davis waiting. "We need to get her out of there," I told him. "Tonight. Whatever she thinks has returned to her isn't her children." I spent the remainder of that day in a feverish search for answers. The Savannah Public Library's archives provided additional details about the 1908 fire that claimed the lives of Catherine Hamilton and her children, Edward and Mary. The fire had started mysteriously in the middle of the night, with all doors and windows found locked from the inside. More disturbing were the rumors that followed. Neighbors claimed to have heard the children screaming for help, calling for their mother, but Catherine Hamilton never responded. Some whispered that she had been the one to set the fire. Further research revealed an even darker history. The house had been built in 1873 by a shipping merchant who reportedly practiced occult rituals in the basement. After his suicide in 1890, the house passed through several owners, none staying longer than a few years. Every family reported strange occurrences, voices, unexplained cold spots, objects moving on their own. 3 different children from 3 different families had disappeared while living in the house, their bodies never found. By evening, I had formed a theory so outlandish that my scientific mind rebelled against it, yet it was the only explanation that accounted for all the facts. The house itself was a locus of supernatural energy, attracting and trapping the spirits of lost children. These entities were not ghosts in the traditional sense, but something more parasitic, feeding on grief and loneliness, mimicking the voices of children to lure in vulnerable caregivers. Mrs. Miller, in her profound grief for her own lost children, had provided the perfect host. I shared my findings with Chief Inspector Davis and Dr. Harrison over dinner at a small restaurant near the library. Davis was skeptical, but Dr. Harrison nodded grimly. "I've practiced medicine in Savannah for 45 years, the old doctor said. "There are cases I've encountered that defy medical explanation. The house on East Jones Street has always had a reputation." "We need to get Mrs. Miller out immediately," I insisted. "Whatever these entities are, they're growing stronger through her belief that they're her children." "And if she refuses to leave?" Davis asked. "Then we remove her by force," I replied, "for her own safety." As we formulated our plan, a young boy approached our table, the busboy, no more than 12 years old. "Excuse me," he said, "but are you the doctor who's helping Mrs. Miller?" When I nodded, he handed me a folded piece of paper. "A lady asked me to give you this, said it was urgent." The note was written in a shaky hand. "They know what you're planning. They're angry. Come quickly. Bessie." I showed the note to Davis and Dr. Harrison. "We need to go now," I said, already standing. "Bring whoever you can." Within the hour, Davis had assembled 4 policemen. Dr. Harrison brought his medical bag, prepared to sedate Mrs. Miller if necessary. As we approached the house, I noticed all the lights were out despite the early evening hour. The air around the property felt charged, as though a storm were brewing despite the clear summer sky. "Bessie said she's been entering through the back," I told Davis. "We should try there first." We made our way around to the rear of the property. The kitchen door stood slightly ajar. An invitation or a trap, I couldn't be sure. Davis drew his revolver and pushed the door open wider. The kitchen was dark and silent. A plate of untouched food sat on the table, Bessie's delivery from earlier that day. We moved cautiously through the house, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Everything was still, eerily so, as though the house were holding its breath. In the front sitting room, we found Bessie. She lay motionless on the floor, a thin line of blood trailing from her nose and ears. Dr. Harrison knelt beside her, checking for a pulse. "She's alive, but her pulse is weak," he reported. "It's as though she suffered some kind of shock." From upstairs came the sound we had been dreading. Children's laughter, no longer attempting to sound innocent, but distorted and malevolent. "Mother's busy now," called William's voice, now deeper than any child's could be. "She's saying goodbye to the world." "You can join her if you like," added Sarah's voice, similarly transformed. "We have room for more." Davis signaled to his men, and they began to climb the stairs, weapons drawn. I followed close behind, dread building with each step. The upper hallway was freezing cold, our breath visible in the beam of the flashlights. Sarah's room was empty, the dolls arranged in a circle on the floor. In William's room, the model ships had been smashed, pieces scattered like broken bones. We found Mrs. Miller in the master bedroom, seated at her vanity table. Her reflection in the mirror wasn't her own. Instead, it showed the faces of two children, their features melting and reforming in a grotesque parody of humanity. "Mrs. Miller," I said softly, approaching her with caution. "It's Dr. Everett. We've come to take you somewhere safe." She turned slowly, her movements jerky and unnatural. When she spoke, her voice alternated between her own and those of the children. "They need me. I'm their mother now. All the lost children need a mother." "They're not your children, Eleanor," I said firmly. "William and Sarah died in Boston many years ago. These are entities using your grief to feed themselves." Her face contorted in rage. "Liar!" she shrieked, and with that cry every object in the room began to vibrate. The temperature dropped further, ice crystals forming on the windows despite the summer heat outside. "Now, Davis!" I shouted. The chief inspector and his men moved forward to restrain Mrs. Miller, but an invisible force threw them back against the wall. Dr. Harrison readied a syringe of sedative, but it shattered in his hand, glass cutting his palm. The entities were protecting their host. As chaos erupted in the bedroom, I realized conventional methods wouldn't work against whatever had taken hold of Mrs. Miller and the house. Drawing on my hasty research, I pulled from my pocket the items I had gathered earlier: salt, a small vial of holy water borrowed from St. John's Cathedral, and a piece of iron from the blacksmith near the market. "Eleanor Miller," I called out, my voice stronger than I felt. "You know the truth in your heart. These are not your children." Her head snapped toward me, eyes black and empty. "We are her children now," the voices spoke through her mouth. "She belongs to us, as the others did before her." "What others?" I demanded, trying to keep their attention while Davis helped his injured men retreat toward the door. A twisted smile spread across Mrs. Miller's face. "The mothers. So many mothers, so full of grief. Their pain is delicious." "The Hamilton woman," I guessed. "Did you take her too?" The thing wearing Eleanor's face laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "She invited us in, just like this one. The lonely ones always do." I began to understand the pattern. The entities didn't just mimic children. They specifically targeted women who had lost children, using that grief as a doorway. Catherine Hamilton hadn't set the fire in 1908. The entities had, after consuming her will completely. "Dr. Harrison," I called, never taking my eyes off Mrs. Miller. "Get everyone out, now." "I'm not leaving you alone," Davis protested. "You have to," I insisted. "I know what to do, but I can't protect all of you while doing it." Reluctantly, Davis helped Dr. Harrison carry Bessie downstairs, the policeman following behind. Once they were gone, I circled the room slowly, pouring a thin line of salt across the doorway and windowsill. "A barrier?" the entities mocked through Mrs. Miller. "How primitive." "Not a barrier," I corrected. "A boundary. You exist between worlds, neither fully here nor there. The salt defines the space where you must follow certain rules." I was working partly on instinct, partly on fragments of folklore I had read during my research. The entities had power, but they were bound by certain metaphysical principles. They needed invitation, they fed on belief and grief, and they were subject to the symbolic power of purifying elements. "Eleanor," I said, addressing the woman trapped inside the possessed body. "Your real children, William and Sarah, died in 1918. You know this. They're at peace now, not trapped in this house." Mrs. Miller's body convulsed, and for a moment I saw her own eyes return. "My children," she whispered. "They called to me." "Not your children," I said firmly. "These entities sensed your grief when you moved in. They've been waiting for Jonathan to die, for your defenses to weaken. They're parasites, Eleanor, feeding on your pain and loneliness." Her face contorted again, the entities reasserting control. "She's ours now," they hissed, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of false, childish tones. "You can't take her." "I'm not trying to take her," I replied calmly. "I'm trying to free her." I uncapped the vial of holy water and moved toward Mrs. Miller. The entities made her body recoil, shrinking against the vanity. "Eleanor," I said softly, "your real children would want you to be free. They wouldn't want you trapped here, being consumed by these things." Something in my words seemed to reach her. Her eyes cleared momentarily, tears welling up. "They died," she whispered. "My babies died. I couldn't save them." "Yes," I said gently, "but you honored them with your love. These entities are desecrating their memory." With a howl of rage, the entities made one last attempt to maintain control. The room shook, objects flew through the air, and Mrs. Miller's body rose several inches off the floor, suspended by invisible forces. I sprinkled the holy water in an arc before me and held out the iron rod like a shield. "By water, salt, and iron," I proclaimed, drawing on half-remembered exorcism rites. "By the memory of her true children and by her own free will, Eleanor Miller is not yours to take." Mrs. Miller's body crashed to the floor, and a sound like 1,000 screaming voices filled the room. The temperature fluctuated wildly, freezing cold, then blazing hot. The mirror on the vanity cracked from edge to edge. And then, silence. I rushed to Mrs. Miller's side, checking her pulse. She was alive, but unconscious. As I lifted her into my arms, I noticed something on the floor where she had fallen. A child's handprint burned into the wooden floorboards, much too large for any human child. Carrying Mrs. Miller, I hurried down the stairs to where Davis and the others waited outside. As we crossed the threshold, the front door slammed shut behind us with such force that one of the hinges broke. "Is she?" Davis began. "She's alive," I confirmed, "but we need to get her to a hospital immediately." As we placed Mrs. Miller in Davis's automobile, I looked back at the house. In an upstairs window, 2 shadowy figures stood watching, small in stature, but somehow filling the entire frame with their malevolence. I knew then that while we had rescued Mrs. Miller, the house remained a trap for the next vulnerable soul who might move in. Mrs. Miller remained unconscious for 3 days. I visited her daily at Savannah Memorial Hospital, where Dr. Harrison had arranged for her to receive the best care available. On the 4th morning, as I sat beside her bed reading case notes, she finally opened her eyes. "Dr. Everett," she said, her voice weak but clear, "you saved me from them." "You saved yourself, Eleanor," I replied, setting aside my notes. "You had to recognize the truth before they could be banished." She turned her face away, tears streaming down her cheeks. "My children are truly gone, aren't they? My real children." "Yes," I said gently, "but they're at peace. What was in that house? Those weren't your William and Sarah." "I knew," she whispered. "Deep down, I always knew. But I wanted so desperately to believe they had come back to me." She shuddered. "What were those things, Dr. Everett?" I considered how to answer. The scientific part of me still struggled with the events I had witnessed, yet I could not deny their reality. "There are energies in this world that science hasn't categorized yet," I said carefully. Some places, like that house, seem to attract negative forces. These particular entities feed on grief and loneliness, especially the grief of mothers. They showed me my children's faces, Mrs. Miller said. They knew things only William and Sarah would know. Private jokes, nicknames, memories from Boston. They read your mind, I explained. They built their deception from your own memories, making it impossible to distinguish their illusion from reality. Mrs. Miller was silent for a long moment. What happens now? To the house? Chief Inspector Davis has declared it unsafe for habitation, pending further investigation. No one will be allowed to live there for the time being. What I didn't tell her was that Davis and I had already begun researching ways to cleanse the property permanently. We had consulted religious leaders from several faiths, as well as scholars of the occult. The house's malevolent history ran deeper than we had initially believed, with records suggesting similar incidents dating back to shortly after its construction. "And what about me?" Mrs. Miller asked, interrupting my thoughts. "Your sister has arranged for you to stay with her in Charleston once you're released from the hospital," I said. "Dr. Harrison and I believe a change of scenery will be beneficial for your recovery." She nodded slowly. "I never thanked Jonathan properly," she murmured. "He knew something was wrong with that house from the beginning. He tried to protect me from it." "He did what he could," I agreed. "The protective measures he put in place, the blessing, the cleansing rituals, they kept the entities at bay while he was alive. They were waiting," she said with sudden clarity. "All those years they were just waiting for me to be alone." She grasped my hand with surprising strength. "Promise me something, Dr. Everett. Promise me you won't let this happen to anyone else." I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I promise." It was a promise I intended to keep, though I didn't yet know how difficult it would prove to be. 2 weeks later, after Mrs. Miller had gone to Charleston with her sister, I returned to the house on East Jones Street with Chief Inspector Davis and Father Donovan from St. John's Cathedral. The city had placed an official condemnation notice on the door, but we all knew that paper bureaucracy would do little to contain the supernatural threat within. Father Donovan performed a blessing in each room, while Davis and I documented the lingering phenomena: cold spots, unexplained sounds, objects that moved when no one was looking. Though diminished without Mrs. Miller's presence to feed on, the entities were still very much present. In the basement, we discovered something the previous investigations had missed: a small hidden chamber behind a false wall, accessible only through a narrow crawl space beneath the stairs. Inside, the brick walls were covered with strange symbols carved directly into the stone, some resembling arcane sigils, others appearing almost like childish drawings, but with disturbing distortions. "These markings," Father Donovan whispered, holding his lantern higher, "they're not random. This is a deliberate ritual space." In the center of the room sat a child-sized chair, its wood blackened with age. Surrounding it was a circle of what appeared to be iron nails driven into the floor. Most disturbing of all was a collection of small personal items arranged on a crude altar: a child's shoe, several locks of hair tied with different colored ribbons, a set of baby teeth, and toys so old they were crumbling to dust. "Mementos," Davis said grimly. "Trophies." "Not trophies," Father Donovan corrected. "Anchors. Each item connects to a child's spirit, keeping it bound to this place." I recalled my research about the shipping merchant who had built the house in 1873. The original owner was rumored to practice the occult. Could he have created this, bound children's spirits here somehow? Father Donovan crossed himself. "This goes beyond mere haunting. This is a deliberate corruption of innocent souls, twisted to feed on the grief of others." He turned to us, his face grave. "This house cannot be cleansed through conventional means. It must be destroyed." Davis shook his head. "The city won't approve demolition of a historic property without substantial cause. We can't exactly file a report citing demonic entities." "Then we must find another way," I insisted, remembering my promise to Mrs. Miller. As we debated our options, A child's laughter echoed through the chamber, faint but unmistakable. The temperature plummeted, our breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. "We should leave," Father Donovan urged. "They know what we're planning. They'll only grow stronger in our presence." We retreated hastily, but not before I noticed something changing in the room behind us. The symbols on the walls beginning to glow with a faint blue light. The circle of nails around the chair vibrating as though struck by invisible hammers. Outside in the summer heat, Father Donovan turned to us. "This house is a vessel for something ancient and malevolent. It doesn't just trap spirits, it transforms them, corrupts them into something that feeds on human suffering. How do we stop it if the city won't let us destroy the property?" Davis asked. I thought of the hidden chamber, the anchoring objects. We may not need to destroy the entire house. Perhaps just breaking the binding circle and removing those objects would be enough. Father Donovan nodded slowly. "It's possible. The ritual items are the focus of the spell. Without them, the spirits might be released. Or made more dangerous," Davis warned. "Either way," I said, "we can't leave things as they are." We agreed to return that night after sunset, when we could work without interruption from curious neighbors or city officials. Darkness had fallen by the time we reconvened at the Miller house. Davis brought two of his most trusted officers, men who had witnessed enough of the strange events to believe in what we were attempting. Father Donovan arrived with his assistant, a young seminarian who carried a bag containing holy water, blessed salt, and other items necessary for the ritual the priest had hastily researched. I had spent the afternoon in the university library, consulting rare texts on occult practices. What I found confirmed Father Donovan's assessment. The hidden chamber was designed as a soul trap, a perversion of protective magic turned to malevolent purpose. The original owner had indeed been more than an amateur occultist. He had been searching for a way to achieve immortality by capturing and consuming the essence of innocent souls. We entered the house quietly, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The oppressive atmosphere was immediately apparent, a heaviness in the air that made breathing difficult, a sense of being watched from every shadow. "They know we're here," Father Donovan whispered. "We must hurry." As we made our way toward the basement stairs, a wind began to blow through the house, despite all windows being closed and boarded. It carried the sound of children's voices, no longer attempting to sound innocent, but distorted and threatening. "Mother sent you away. Mother doesn't want you here. This is our house now." "Ignore them," I advised the others. "They're trying to frighten us off." The basement door slammed shut as we approached it. Davis and his men forced it open, the wood splintering under their combined strength. The stairs beyond creaked ominously as we descended into the darkness below. The hidden chamber seemed to have expanded somehow, the walls pushed back, the ceiling higher than I remembered. The symbols carved into the brick glowed with that same eerie blue light, pulsing like a heartbeat. The child's chair in the center of the nail circle now held a crude doll, fashioned from what looked like human hair and scraps of clothing. Mrs. Miller's hair, I realized, recognizing a scrap of fabric from her dress. They've made an effigy to maintain their connection to her. Father Donovan directed his assistant to begin a protective circle around us, using the blessed salt while he opened his prayer book. "We must work quickly. I'll begin the prayers of banishment while you remove the anchoring objects." I approached the altar cautiously. Each item, the shoe, the locks of hair, the teeth, seemed to vibrate with malevolent energy. As I reached for the first lock of hair, bound with a blue ribbon, the doll on the chair turned its head to face me. "Touch that and she dies," it said, in a perfect imitation of William's voice. "Mother dies if you take what belongs to us." I hesitated, uncertain if this was a bluff or a genuine threat. Could they still affect Mrs. Miller from a distance? Davis made the decision for me, stepping forward and sweeping all the items from the altar into a canvas bag. "Enough of this. We end it now." The reaction was immediate and violent. The house shook as though struck by an earthquake. The glowing symbols flared blindingly bright, then began to bleed dark liquid down the walls. The doll rose from the chair, hovering in mid-air. "You will join us!" Voices screamed from everywhere and nowhere, no longer attempting to sound childlike. "All of you!" Father Donovan began his ritual, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around us. His assistant sprinkled holy water on the walls, the symbols hissing and smoking where the droplets landed. I took the iron rod I had brought and approached the circle of nails surrounding the floating doll. Following my research, I began to pry up the nails one by one, breaking the binding circle that had trapped the spirits for decades. The entities fought back with every nail I removed. Objects flew across the room, striking us with surprising force. The temperature fluctuated wildly, burning hot one moment, freezing the next. One of Davis's officers collapsed, clutching his chest as though something were crushing it. "Keep going!" Father Donovan shouted over the cacophony of screams and wails that filled the chamber. "The binding is weakening." As I pulled the final nail free, the floating doll burst into flames so intense they were almost white. The bag containing the anchoring objects began to smoke in Davis's hands. He dropped it into the center of the broken circle where it ignited, adding to the supernatural blaze. Father Donovan raised his crucifix high. "By the power of Christ I command you, release these souls and depart from this place." For one terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the flames turned from white to blue to an impossible black that seemed to devour the light around it. The screaming reached a crescendo, so painful that all of us covered our ears, and suddenly, silence. The flames vanished, the glowing symbols faded, the oppressive atmosphere lifted like a heavy curtain being drawn aside. In the center of the broken circle where the doll and bag had burned, there was nothing left but a small pile of ash. As we watched, a gentle breeze that couldn't possibly have existed in the sealed basement room scattered the ashes into nothingness. "Is it over?" Davis asked, helping his fallen officer to his feet. Father Donovan closed his prayer book slowly. "I believe the binding has been broken. The spirits are free from their corruption." "Free to what?" I asked. "Move on to whatever awaits them, or free to haunt this house in a different form." "That," Father Donovan said quietly, "remains to be seen." The following days passed without incident. No disturbances were reported at the Miller house. No strange sounds or moving objects. The cold spots that had marked certain areas of the property seemed to have normalized. By all appearances, our ritual had succeeded in breaking whatever malevolent spell had held the house in its grip for so many years. Davis arranged for a team to brick up the entrance to the hidden chamber permanently. The city council, though skeptical of our explanations, agreed to maintain the condemnation notice on the property for at least 6 months, giving us time to ensure the haunting had truly ended. I wrote to Mrs. Miller in Charleston, informing her that the issues with her former home had been resolved, using carefully coded language to avoid alarming her sister. Her reply was brief but heartfelt. "Dr. Everett, I feel a weight has lifted from me, as though chains I didn't know I carried have fallen away. My dreams are no longer haunted by false voices. Thank you for keeping your promise. Eleanor Miller." A week after our ritual, I received an unexpected visit from Bessie, Mrs. Miller's former housekeeper. She had recovered from her encounter in the house and come to return a book I had left at the hospital during one of my visits with Mrs. Miller. "Have you been back to the house?" she asked as we sat in my office at the university. "Briefly, to check that all remains quiet," I replied. "So far, there have been no further incidents." Bessie nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "The night after you performed your ritual, I had a dream. I saw children, many children, walking up a path toward a bright light. They looked peaceful, free. The spirits from the house?" I suggested. "I believe so, but there was something else." She frowned, trying to recall the details. "At the edge of the dream, in the shadows, I saw a man watching them go, an old man with cold eyes. He seemed angry. A chill ran through me as I recalled my research into the original owner of the house. "Did this man do anything in your dream?" Bessie shook her head. "No. It was as though he couldn't follow where the children were going. He just watched, and then faded back into the darkness." I thanked Bessie for sharing her dream, though I didn't tell her how significant I found it. If her vision reflected some spiritual reality, it suggested that while we had freed the children's spirits from their corruption and bondage, the original evil, the shipping merchant who had created the soul trap, might still be connected to the property in some form. That evening, I returned to the Miller house alone. The summer sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown garden. The house stood silent, no lights visible through the boarded windows, no movement behind the drawn curtains. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, half expecting to feel that familiar, oppressive atmosphere. But the air was simply stale and warm. I moved through each room methodically, noting any changes since our ritual. The children's bedrooms remained as they had been, the toys arranged, the beds made, but now they seemed like museum displays rather than actively used spaces. In the master bedroom, Mrs. Miller's vanity mirror had been replaced, the broken one removed by Davis's men. I stood before it, seeing only my own reflection, tired eyes, a face aged beyond its years by recent events. "Are you still here?" I asked the empty house. "Did we miss something?" No response came, no temperature changes, no disembodied voices, no moving objects. The house was just a house, old with creaking floors and settling foundations, but nothing more. I was about to leave when I noticed something on Mrs. Miller's dresser that hadn't been there during our ritual, a small, worn photograph in a silver frame. I picked it up, examining it in the fading light. The photograph showed a young Eleanor Miller, with two small children, a boy of about 7 and a girl of 4. They stood before a lake, all three smiling at the camera. Written on the back in faded ink were the words, "William, Sarah, and Mother, at Lake Winnipesaukee, summer 1917. Last vacation." This was the only photograph I had seen of Mrs. Miller's actual children. All the family pictures on the mantelpiece had been of her and Jonathan alone. How had this appeared after she had left? As I set the photograph down, I caught a movement in the mirror, not a menacing presence, but something gentle, like a ripple across water. For the briefest moment, I thought I saw them reflected there, William and Sarah Miller, smiling, whole, at peace. Then they were gone, and I was looking at my own reflection once more. I left the photograph where I had found it and departed the house, locking the door behind me. Whether what I had seen was real, or simply my mind providing a comforting conclusion to our ordeal, I couldn't say with scientific certainty, but I chose to believe it was the former, a final farewell from two children long departed, freed at last from the corruption that had bound them to this world. 1 year later, I stood on the sidewalk opposite the house on East Jones Street, watching as workers removed the last of the condemnation notices. After months of monitoring and several thorough investigations by both scientific and spiritual experts, the city had declared the property safe for habitation once more. The house had been purchased by a young couple from New York, he a writer, she a painter, who had been enchanted by its Victorian architecture and history. They knew nothing of its dark past. Davis and I had ensured those records were sealed, accessible only to those with proper authorization. Some might call it deception, but we believed it was protection. The house no longer posed a supernatural threat, but knowledge of its history could create expectations, and expectations sometimes manifested in dangerous ways. "Do you think we should have told them?" Davis asked, joining me on the sidewalk. He had been promoted to commissioner in the months following our ordeal, partly due to his handling of the Miller situation, as it was discreetly referred to in official circles. "No," I replied. "The house is clean now. What happened here died with the binding ritual." "You sound certain," Davis observed. "I wasn't, not completely." Though no further incidents had occurred, I still felt a subtle wrongness about the property. Nothing I could define scientifically, merely an intuition that some echo of the original evil remained, dormant but not destroyed. "I've arranged for Father Donovan to bless the house before they move in," I told Davis. "A precaution, nothing more." Davis nodded, satisfied. "And Mrs. Miller, have you heard from her? She's doing well in Charleston. Her sister writes that she's become involved with a children's charity, reading to orphans at the local home. She's found a way to channel her maternal instincts positively." What I didn't tell Davis was that Mrs. Miller had written to me directly the previous month, a letter marked private and personal. In it, she had described dreams of her children, not nightmares, but peaceful visions in which William and Sarah appeared to her as they had been in life, healthy and happy. They never spoke in these dreams, merely smiled at her from a distance before fading away. "I know now they've moved on," she had written, "and soon I will be ready to do the same." As Davis and I walked away from the house, I reflected on how the experience had changed my own perspective. I had come to Savannah as a man of science, certain that all phenomena could be explained through rational means. I left with my certainty shaken, my understanding of reality expanded to include possibilities I had previously dismissed. My report to the Georgia State Psychiatric Board had been deliberately vague, focusing on Mrs. Miller's psychological state, rather than the supernatural aspects of the case. My colleagues in the scientific community would not have understood, might have questioned my competence or sanity had I included everything I had witnessed. Some truths, I had learned, were better left undocumented. I had, however, begun my own private research into similar cases across the country. The Miller house was not unique. Other properties with dark histories had manifested similar phenomena. Some pattern existed, connecting these hauntings across time and geography, and I was determined to understand it. That evening, I returned to my small apartment and added the final pages to my personal account of the Miller case. I sealed the manuscript in an envelope marked, "To be opened only in the event of my death or disappearance," and placed it in my safe. Perhaps someday, when the world was ready for such truths, someone would find my notes and continue the research I had begun. As I prepared for bed, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the bathroom mirror. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something behind me, small figures at the edge of perception. But when I turned, there was nothing there. Just shadows and the night wind rustling through the Spanish moss outside my window. Just shadows, or so I chose to believe. In Savannah, they say, the past is never truly dead. It lives on in the ancient oaks, the historic homes, the stories passed down through generations. Some of those stories are meant to entertain, some to instruct, and some, like the tale of the Miller house on East Jones Street, serve as warnings, reminders that between our world and whatever lies beyond, the veil is thinner than we might wish to believe. I still walk past that house occasionally, watching the new owners build their life there, unaware of what came before. Sometimes, when the light is just right, I think I see faces at the upstairs windows, not malevolent but watchful, waiting for what I dare not contemplate. From the Personal Journals of Dr. Thomas Everett, Georgia State Psychiatric Board, 1938-1942.